Welcome to an honest conversation, part of a research of an upcoming doc on the rise of anti-Semitism, the reasons for this persistent problem, and the unlikely solutions offered by the wisdom of Kabbalah. Please like, comment, and subscribe below to the channel. With me, as usual, is Michael Laitman, Doctor of Medical Biocybernetics and PhD in Philosophy and Kabbalah, author of more than 50 books, translated into 18 languages, including Like a Bundle of Reeds, Why Unity and Mutual Guarantee are the Call of the Hour. Thank you for your tireless work on the issue and for being here. And with us today, also, I'm very happy to have is Shaul Magid, PhD in Jewish thought, distinguished fellow in Jewish studies at Dartmouth College, former professor of religious studies, and the J. and Jeannie Schottenstein Chair of Jewish Studies and Modern Judaism at Indiana University, as well as senior research fellow at Shalom Hartman Institute. He also served as professor of Jewish philosophy at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, where he was chair of the Department of Jewish Philosophy, author of numerous articles and books about Hasidism and Kabbalah. Hi, Shaul.
Hi.
I feel like viewers have been hearing some of these talks, so I want to kind of offer a brief summary so we can kind of dive into the heart of things. But feel free, Dr. Laitman, to add if I miss anything. And Shaul, as I said, this is a conversation. Feel free to jump in, ask questions. We want to keep it as open as as honest, as open as possible. Dr. Laitman, you claim that Jews have the power to lift the thread of anti-Semitism. That it's up to us, really. In a nutshell, if Jews connect above all their differences and internal rifts, the world will follow. And if we don't, the world will turn against us, basically. You further explain that it is actually a result of the laws of nature, the same laws that govern networks and all other integral systems. And in practical terms, we can say that Jews are powerful and, in quotation marks, bad. So it doesn't matter what we think we're doing, we're breaking some laws of nature, and that is making people around us intuitively hate us, dislike us, resent us. So can you explain a bit more about those laws of nature, just so we understand what laws are we talking about here?
Well, look, the people of Israel is not a nation, which corresponds with what the Torah says, that it's not counted among the nations. Israel is an ideology. This grouping of people was made as a group who followed the school of Abraham in ancient Babylon, similar to what the scriptures write. What Abraham saw was that the Babylonian society began to have a conflict. And before that, they were very unified. As it says that everything was one and so forth. So as one of the Babylonian priests, he was researching that. He was looking into that. And the insights he came to were that it's all dependent on the growth, the peaking of the human ego, the increase of human egoism in those tribes and clans and groups that lived in ancient Babylon. And so, ancient Mesopotamia. And so they started being in conflicts. So Abraham understood the reason as the rise of the human ego. What he started explaining to people is that we have to consciously transcend the human ego and achieve a higher level of unity. Before that increase of the ego, people lived well together. So most people didn't understand what he was talking about. But some did. Like Rambam writes, that thousands joined him, but still it was just a small portion of the ancient kingdom of Babylon. And so he put together a group who came to his calling, who came after him, and he established a group. The motto of that group was love thy friend as thyself, which means that if we come together, come closer to each other, being able to raise each other above our human ego, that takes us to a stronger bond, to the point of what's called love. And that essentially is the meaning of the maxim, love thy friend as thyself. And so, since then, that group was established and later called Israel. He taught them that if we long to the quality of connection between us, we're actually yearning for the higher quality of connection in nature, which you can call God or the Creator or the upper force. And that's why, according to our inclination, we will call ourselves Israel, Yashar Kel, which means straight to God. And so people joined him. Later on, they detached from Babylon, they went towards the land of Canaan, and there's all that story that we perhaps are familiar with. But the point is that they became a nation over time, later on. They started being closer, working together on their connection, and so forth. Now, all the rest of the Babylonians, they over time scattered because the hatred rose among them, which is also expressed in the writings of Josephus and others. They scattered across the planet. And to this day, what we're seeing is that essentially there are 70 nations of the world. Of course, there are many more today. It depends on how you count them. But there is a specific group, a unique group, called the people of Israel. So what's happening with this group is that this group has acquired that methodology of human connection, that method of correction of the human nature. And it lived by that method for a certain period of time, going up and down in that connection, of course, but essentially until the destruction of the Second Temple, when unfounded hatred increased, the ego increased among them again, and they left that state of connection between them. Since then, it is considered that we are in exile. This is the longest exile of 2,000 years and so forth. And so, since then, since Babylon, and especially after we fell from the degree of spiritual connection between us, all the rest of the nations have a certain deep-seated demand or claim towards us that we are guilty for evils in the world. Why? Because a positive force, not a force, but more accurately, a methodology to activate a positive force of human connection exists within us. It resides in us. And we need to verify it and apply it and exemplify it. And that's the meaning of being light unto the nations. And so, since then, anti-Semitism, if you can call it that way, it is something that exists in the world that goes up and down more or less, but as humanity advances more and more, further and further, the hatred towards the Jews is increasing. And actually, among the more developed nations, you'll find greater anti-Semitism. And among nations who didn't know at all about that, now it is awakening there as well, even if you won't find Jews among them and they don't really know what Jews are. And that's because it is embedded in the laws of nature. The more humanity advances in our broken world, in our crisis-driven world, and the more humanity finds how broken it is in its connections, the more it finds resistance and antagonism towards that group, the people of Israel, because there's a demand for that methodology of connection, and deep down they have this claim that all the troubles somehow emerge from them, from the Jews, and they think that the Jews are hiding some sort of method for correction, for bringing the world to good. And it's actually right. There's nothing we can do here besides explaining. We need to explain to our people who actually don't know. They just don't know who they are, where they're from, and what they're for. And they're either immersed in religion, which is something that is completely external to what I'm talking about, which is our inner spiritual mission. And then there's also explaining that to the whole world, to clarify why the hatred towards us and what we all need to do together, both the nations of the world and the people of Israel, to come to such a global connection and a state in which human connection and even love can embrace the world. And according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, now we're coming to a final stage, which is a very challenging one, where we ourselves have to realize the method of correction, the method of connection between us, as well as show it to all the world. And so there's a specific, unique opportunity which Kabbalists write about. And that's why this is now a big problem with regards to all the other nations and us. So that was kind of a summary. If you want, Shaul, I'll be happy to elaborate on anything here.
No, thank you very much. I had the opportunity to read some of your work and to listen to some YouTube clips before of you and some of your students, so I'm somewhat familiar. If I may, Leo, can I respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, respond, ask. Yeah.
There are a few things that I find. There are a few things that I'm very sympathetic toward in your basic theory, but I want to really begin by a comment that Theodore Adorno made, which I think really relates to the subject at hand, and that is that he said that prejudice he was talking about prejudice and more generally, and he says everybody has a theory about prejudice and nobody has a solution. And I want to kind of begin as a kind of coterate for a remark to say that there's a lot of things that I'm very sympathetic toward in your thinking. First of all, the Abrahamic origins, the notion of Judaism as an idea versus a people per se, the idea that the Jews themselves bear responsibility on some level to the acrimony and hatred toward them over history. I think that the problem that I have is that you're offering a kind of a metaphysical solution to an extremely complicated human problem. And while I'm certainly sympathetic as somebody who has, worked, seriously in Kabbalah for the last 40 years, I'm certainly sympathetic to the metaphysical construct of thinking about this, the ideas that you say. I think that when we talk about anti-Semitism, in a way, your position really totally dehistoricizes the complex realities of human civilization over the course of 1,500 years, 2,000 years.
No. Actually, why historical? It's both history, but also present.
Yes, no, for sure. No, I understand that. I understand that. I guess what I'm saying is that you're offering both a template and a solution to the problem, and the solution to the problem only becomes operable when you accept the basic template of what the problem is. So, in a sense, it removes the more complex civilizational issues regarding all the other religious traditions and societies throughout history that have reacted to Jews in a variety of ways. Now, I understand that you can, once you have a metaphysical template, you can feed all of history into it. I just feel that on the one hand, and it's very strange for me to say this in a way, but on the one hand, one of my reactions is that you're almost putting too much of responsibility on the Jews to solve the problem, rather than seeing the problem.
Well, it's not more, it's everything. I put all responsibility on Jews. And nations of the world have no freedom of choice in this
But,
case.
which I must say is actually incredibly subversive and also courageous in terms of making that claim vis-a-vis how Jews have traditionally reacted to hatred against them, or anti-Semitism, or anti-Judaism, or however you want to actually put it. I find that, and it would be interesting for me to hear how other people would respond to that, because in a sense, it's a bit of a, I don't know what the right term. It's a bit of a bombshell in a way, to subvert the entire problem as the consequence of Jewish infidelity to the Abrahamic idea, right? In a certain way, that's kind of what you're saying. I guess.
Shaul,
Me? No, Shaul. No. I'm loyal to Abraham's tradition in the sense of love thy friend as thyself, which means that Jews have to do this among them and present it to the world. So the Jewish people is not loyal to this at all. Yes. Right. It cannot be called a true Jewish people today.
Yes, and so therefore, first of all, I think it's interesting for me that your definition of the Jew which is now determined in a very obviously physiological, biological way. You're trying to expand and say, no, the Jew is actually somebody who embodies an idea. Right? And the idea is this notion of interconnectedness, this notion of unity, this notion of the Afta L'Recha Ka'amocha, the idea of and I saw in one of the other YouTubes that one of your students had made about the kind of interconnectedness of the world. Which again, I'm very sympathetic toward. I just wonder if how that can really fit into the more complex notion of race science and the racialization of the Jew over history and the antipathy towards Judaism vis-a-vis Christianity and to a lesser extent Islam. In other words, it seems like to me, and I say this with deep respect, it seems like to me that the problem is a lot more complicated. You're not making it simple. I understand that. You're actually offering a very complicated reading, but it's a lot more complicated vis-a-vis the way that Judaism not only was seen by others, but the way Judaism presented itself to the world.
Shaul, I want to ask: is there another solution? Because I looked in a part of this research, I looked far and wide for what people are offering, and I'm seeing mostly two main approaches today to this problem. One is saying there is no problem. I mean, there's a problem. We have to live with it, kind of, right? Which is it's a terrible state of mind as far as I'm concerned. And the other one is saying, no, hate is something we should fight, we should stand up to, we should make laws against it. People shouldn't hate. People shouldn't be at each other's, and we'll try to kind of go at it one case at a time. We'll do campaigns and all that. What I'm concerned about was, and this is me personally, is that laws don't change people's feelings. Cultural conventions don't really change the root of someone's feeling towards you. And if you look at Germany 100 years ago, Jews were the most respected people. People loved them. They were the greatest.
Right.
And in a heartbeat.
So
correctly speaking.
I hear you. So I guess I would say it this way, and this speaks to also Dr. Laitman's theory to some extent. I think it's a very big question whether we should see anti-Semitism as sui generis. Meaning that is the hatred or antipathy toward the Jew or towards Jews or towards Judaism, is it categorically different than the hatred of any people toward any other people? Do we see anti-Semitism as a part of a larger problem of prejudice and hatred that human beings have toward one another, which they probably have had toward the beginning of time, or do we see it as something special? I think that Dr. Laitman is offering a theory that there's something sui generis about anti-Semitism, and it goes back to the Abrahamic origins and the idea of interconnectedness and the way in which people over time have had both difficult resistance toward that interconnectedness, and also the way Jews who carry that Abrahamic mandate have not expressed and exemplified that kind of interconnectedness through their experience as Jews and through Judaism. And again, I think that's a really fascinating way of thinking about it. But I would say, in terms of questions of solutions, is there a solution to anti-Semitism? No, I don't think there is. I don't think there's a solution to prejudice. I mean, I think that...
So that's the question, really.
Why? Why? There is an excellent solution to anti-Semitism. It is that Jews themselves will begin to follow that human connection that Abraham was talking about, love covers all crimes and so forth, rising above all of the conflicts, hatred, division between them. This is what is called crimes, that they will cover it with love, with greater connection, with adhesion with each other, and by that they will radiate that peace towards the world, to a state called the final correction.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, but that is very, very similar to the Christian message, because that was basically what Jesus was teaching in the gospel. Right, as a Jew, as maybe an inheritor of the Abrahamic tradition, that the idea of loving the enemy, the idea of interconnectedness, is precisely what Christianity in its origins had basically professed.
We don't need to love the enemy. What we need to do is correct ourselves. Then we'll see that we actually don't have enemies, because our mutual hatred and conflicts, that is what births the enemies in the world towards us.
No, I understand that. And there is, by the way, there is a rendering of that message of Jesus, which is precisely what you said, that when we fix ourselves, we'll realize that we don't actually have any enemies. But in any event, I don't want to kind of get into that. It's a whole other thing.
To me, it doesn't matter if someone said this or said that. I myself didn't study Jesus, and I don't intend to, and many can write and speak in his name. What I'm talking about is what our inner Torah is actually about, what the internality of Kabbalah talks about from generation to generation to this day. This is what the book of Zohar talks about. This is what the ancient texts are talking about. And so that's irrelevant what Jesus has to say in that regards.
That's true. I think that in a way, and this actually speaks closer to it simply because of Rabbi Ashlag's relationship to communism, for example. I think that communism too makes that argument to some degree, and that's why I think that Rabbi Ashlag had so much sympathy toward communism, because he saw that it was a social manifestation of what he considered to be a Kabbalistic secret in a certain way. Now, I guess the question then we could ask is why, the fact that these different experiments at the solution to the problem of not only anti-Semitism, but the solution of inter-ethnic hatred, the solution of racial hatred, the solution of bigotry, never seem to actually be able to grow roots deep enough to sustain a civilization toward that goal. That human beings, and this goes back to the Kabbalah as well, in terms of the relationship between the Sitra Achra and the Yetzer Hara, all of those kinds of things, right? So we're always struggling with that challenge of the fallibility.
What we're actually struggling with is the human ego. That's the true meaning of the devil or the Sitra Achra, the other side, or all those terms. There's nothing more to battle with than the human ego. And if we manage to do it correctly through helping each other, we have to convince ourselves first that there is no other choice. It's either we win against our ego and begin to form a connection above that. That's what Abraham was talking about. That's what's called love covers all crimes. Or, as it says, this will become your burial place, one of the two. And so what I'm seeing is that we're in a state where we don't really have a choice. I used to write about anti-Semitism happening in America 15 years ago, about 15 years ago, as I wrote about the European Union coming to a crisis within 20 years. And these things, unfortunately, are happening, but it's not because I have some prediction spirit. It's because there's laws of nature that can certainly foresee and predict what's happening. What I would like to ask you is, in what way do you think we can somehow explain to American Jews that there is a way to begin reversing the trend and even saving ourselves from a future Holocaust? I'm saying something very serious right now. Leo knows this. 10 or 15 years ago, I said there will be anti-Semitism in America and in other places, and that it's going to be tougher and tougher to walk with kippahs on the street, and mezuzahs will be ripped out of their posts and so on. But it sounded very, very far-fetched. I understand that. And when I'm saying now that if within 15 years something like a Holocaust can happen, I realize how that sounds, but we can't sit and wait for it to happen. The previous Holocaust happened in Germany when Germany was the most developed country in those times. It can happen in a place like America, and typically the most developed nation is the one that feels anti-Semitism in the most qualitative and worst way. And this is something that can only evolve further. How can we explain to an American Jew that salvation is in connection?
Well, the question of anti-Semitism in America is obviously a complicated one, as we see on the news all the time. I think that there's an important distinction in my mind to make between anti-Semites and anti-Semitism, and that is as follows. One of the lessons of Pittsburgh was not the fact that some deranged person, who was actually targeting a synagogue that was supporting immigrants who were not Jews, obviously immigrants of color, in terms of the Hayas group, came and murdered 11 Jews. I think that, as horrific as that is, I think the interesting thing about Pittsburgh was how the American community, American Muslims, Latino Americans, evangelical Americans, Americans on the right, Americans on the left, all came out in support of the Jews of Pittsburgh. It wasn't a sign of anti-Semitism. In some way, Pittsburgh was a sign of the lack of anti-Semitism. Not that there wasn't an anti-Semite that went and murdered Jews, but the entire country came out in support. That was not true in Germany, obviously, as you know. So I think the issue is...
In Germany, it was even more than that. There was more support in Germany. Germans were in favor of Jews. You know how the Nazi movement started? It started with Jews. With Jews. Jews and Nazis worked together with the settlement in Israel. They supported Jews moving to Israel. They wanted to help establish the state of Israel. That's how it started in Germany. The fact that verbally you hear about support in versus what happens in Pittsburgh, it doesn't mean anything. Let's not shut our eyes. Look, we are really facing a danger. It is gradually escalating and expanding. If we fail to recognize it, it's just like the Jews, while they were taken to Auschwitz in a train, they thought they were being taken on a trip. Let's not, God forbid, reach this kind of situation. In my eyes, in my view, I'm seeing a great danger. That's why I'm trying to awaken the hearts of Jews to actually recognize what is happening. What I'm seeing is that history is repeating itself, just like they didn't think that such a thing can happen in Germany, and Germans are so developed and educated and intelligent and so on, culturally and so forth. The Jews before the Holocaust were everywhere, as you know, in culture and science and literature, and they were in the top of German society. But what happened? None of that, that was actually what shut their eyes. That helped shutting their eyes. Because when I, for instance, went to talk in universities in America and a few places, so I was in this argument, trying to tell them how can you not see what's happening? That was with the Hillel organization. That was maybe 8 years ago, 7-8 years ago. They didn't agree at all with what I was saying. Of course, they tried to shame me for talking about these things, about we are mixed with everyone, and look what's happening now. There's barely a safe place in campuses in terms of anti-Semitism. And
I have a question, guys. I have a question because I don't want us to just debate the state of things. Maybe it's hard to tell. It's clear that in hindsight we're all much smarter. Is the society going to turn on Jews or not? Hard to say. History showed it did once. It might do it again. But the question is really, and I'm really curious about it, because right now in Manhattan there's the ADL Anti-Semitism Summit. 2019. People are coming from all over to me to talk. I've been to those events. And I've seen also Dr. Laitman speak in some of these events, the IEC events. The conversation is never about Jewish unity. You go to the World Zionist organization, it's not about this unity. There's voices here and there, but I don't see Jews making even the effort to do this as an exercise. For 1 year we'll really be brothers. It sounds so simple and yet so outlandish. Is it really? I'm asking you, Shaul. Do you think, even as a social experiment, we can do it? I'm really curious.
I guess I think maybe what stands between Dr. Laitman and I on this question in a more theoretical way, rather than diving into the weeds of these kinds of issues, because I think on a lot of the issues vis-a-vis the weeds, I think we agree with a lot. I think whether this is a question of the laws of nature or whether it's the question of human nature. When we talk about anti-Semitism,
but isn't human nature part of nature? I mean,
no, because I think Dr. Laitman is saying that there's something.
No, human nature and the inclusive laws of nature are all intertwined. It's interconnected, and that's why anti-Semitism is part of the laws of nature. The nature of the human ego is part of the laws of nature. What we can do is invert the way in which the law works towards us by working towards love and connection between us. That's what the Torah is talking about. That's what is up to us to do, and that's what the nations of the world are pushing us to do.
I think I wonder. Back to Leo's question about unity. I'm very skeptical on the question of unity. I don't think that. There wasn't unity even in Abraham's sons. I think that the very notion of unity is a somewhat of an Edenic, utopian vision, which I don't necessarily think ever did exist, nor ever perhaps will exist, at least unless something changes very drastically. So it's not really about unity. I think that
Shaul, that is exactly right. That's what I'm saying. That something so drastic will have to happen that we will be forced by very big blows to start that process. I'm saying let's not wait for that to happen. Let's make a baby step forward, because there's no choice.
Why wasn't the Shoah? The Shoah did not produce unity among the Jews or among the world. There was sympathy. The world was sympathetic to the Jewish genocide, but there was no unity.
נכון.
True.
And the Jews in Palestine were fighting with each other when the Jews were being killed and murdered in Auschwitz, right? So at the same moment,
True.
right? So I think that the idea of unity, I mean, obviously none of us want something like that to happen again in order to kickstart this process. So I'm not sure what you're suggesting in terms of how this process could begin to happen. Like what would need to happen just on the ground, right, for this process to begin to happen? And what would unity actually even mean?
What we need to start with is publicity, advertising this, disseminating this, explaining this, raising awareness wherever possible, that we don't have a choice, and if we don't come together, we also radiate that onto the world. We cause lack of connection in the world, and when the world becomes further disconnected, it leads to collapses, just like what's happening gradually in Europe, and you'll see that will happen in America as well. Crises will escalate until we will reach a third world war. And this is what the Zohar talks about, and it will happen. But who will be guilty? The Jews. And they will be blamed, and rightly so. That's why this is deterministic. We don't have a reason, a choice. We have to start explaining that. Once we just make a subtle shift in the attitude towards that, towards love that covers all our differences, our crimes, towards greater connection between us, that's it. You'll see how the atmosphere is changing. The nations of the world will begin to support us. They will, as the prophecy of Isaiah is saying, that the children of the nations of the world will carry the people of Israel and take them to the mountain of the Lord, etc. This is all something that can happen if we don't wait for it to be too late. Because when it's too late, the destruction begins to take place.
So I'm very sympathetic to that. I guess my question to you is then, since so much of, as you know very well, so much of the Jewish tradition and of Judaism in halakha, in philosophy, everything is really structured around separation from the nations. That, in a sense, your vision requires a complete realignment of Judaism, not as something that is actually an inward force, but rather an expansive one. How would that manifest itself practically?
There's no problem. What does it say about the end of days? That everyone comes to a connection, and we induce that connection. It says, "My house shall be a house of prayer for all nations." That's the end goal, and we have to lead towards that. It is written in Psalms.
Right. So how would you then, because again, this is something that I've thought about a lot. I mean, how would you, and by the way, this is something that is very much a part of the kind of thinking of people like Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who wanted to create some kind of universalist Judaism, not only in thought, but in practice. In practice, to make Judaism what he called a world religion, right, that would absorb other wisdoms, that would contribute other wisdoms to the world, but that would require significant alterations practically on the ground of how Jews go about doing what they do halachically. So how would you respond to that?
I don't think that there is this kind of problem here. And also, according to the method that you mentioned there, as a Kabbalist, what I rely on is only the authentic sources, especially not the modern sources that are like passing fads. What I see is that what the wisdom of Kabbalah really demands from all of us is the true essence of Judaism that is actually beyond all differences, and it's beyond religion, it's beyond belief systems. What it demands is only unity, starting from the Jews and then spreading on to all the nations of the world, exemplifying that greater connection. Human evolution is taking us towards that, but that is happening through suffering, through labor pains and blows. The wisdom of Kabbalah is simply the method of connection that was devised by Abraham, formed with the group of Abraham. And what it does is it takes us towards connection in a positive way. I'm nevertheless looking for some people in the United States who can somehow help us see how to make this message known, because there is hope that in doing that we can mitigate and even stop the escalating eruption of anti-Semitism in America, because otherwise we could be speaking in a year from now and being in a much worse state.
I agree with you. I suppose maybe it comes down to a much more internal disagreement of sorts. I don't read the Zohar as a universalist text. I don't read Luriana Kabbalah as a universalist text. I think there is a strong sense of demonizing the other, of creating an extremely xenophobic worldview of the other as being the negative, the dark energy, the destructive energy. And so what you're suggesting is a really complete subversive rereading of the entire Kabbalistic tradition, because we may read the Kabbalistic tradition differently. I don't read the Zohar in that way. I don't read it as a text that's actually reaching out to the world at all. I read it as a text that is creating some metaphysical, cosmic template for tikkun.
But Dr. Laitman, I hear you many times you talk about all the Kabbalistic texts as describing this inner struggles of a person and not a historic document, although they do have that kind of repercussion on the world, on perception of reality. But you always say that the Zohar, the Torah, they all speak about the inner struggles, the forces inside of a person as he works to rise above his selfish, egoistic desires. Maybe that's the point of contention here.
No, I don't think that's something we can actually go into in terms of researching how and what's the structure of the Kabbalistic texts. That's a whole ocean that we can't go into right now. What I think is important is just one central principle that I emphasized, and that's love thy friend as thyself. The increase of human connection after the shattering of what we had since the ancient times. To this day, we are still in this shattered reality, and it is up to the people of Israel to reconnect it. And using the wisdom of Kabbalah, we can do this, and in our days it becomes a necessity. It simply becomes a necessity. I'm afraid for the Jews of the world, and especially in America. They are in a coma. They don't understand what's happening around them, just like in Germany they didn't understand. And just like my teacher warned Jews of Germany that Holocaust is about to happen. And they laughed and mocked. Unfortunately, I'm sadly seeing myself as a very little one compared to him, but I have to say that to the American Jews as well.
I mean, I share that. I would also add that as somebody who has spent part of my adult life in Israel and part of my adult life in America, and now living in America, I share that. I also would say that equally, although differently, the way in which the direction that Israel is going, not only politically, but also theologically, and on questions of identity is equally troubling and equally dangerous, although maybe not dangerous in terms of the physical danger.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly agree with you. In this, we are completely together, for sure. But what are we going to do, Shaul? What are we going to do? At least somewhat we understand each other, so I'm asking, what can we as two Jews who see somewhat of this situation and somewhat have an agreement, then what can we do? You live in America most of your life. I, most of my life, live in Israel. What can we do to save the Jewish people? The world as well, of course, from all the troubles.
Right. That is obviously the question that I certainly do not have a solution for. I'm again very sympathetic to the kinds of solutions that you're suggesting. I'm not exactly sure in the nuts and bolts day to day how one does that. I think for me, again, speaking in America and not in Israel, I think that what I've tried to do in my work to some extent is to re-envision a Judaism that encompasses a universalist vision of the global crisis as a way of contributing to creating some kind of a more humanistic and we call it unified sentiment. So yes, I think my small contribution would be to try to re-envision a Judaism that is not introverted but extroverted.
Shaul, I also want to ask, I know we have to conclude in a second, but a lot of the arguments, complaints that I see on Twitter, online, is always about Jews hold the keys to the world, they have the power and all that. And in some respects, I look at myself, I don't have the keys to anything, barely the keys to my home. But in other respects, you look at every news outlet owned by a Jewish person, every network, every this, every that. It seems like Jews do have the ability to create a media-driven influence. At the very least, I work in advertising. I know how it is. You can make people buy stuff they don't need and believe things and admire values that are actually going against their well-being, right? I really wonder how can this message get to to the people who just practically, as you said, they're there. They're sitting on those channels of communications. And by the way, a lot of the complaints of anti-Semites is like, you are fueling our culture with this and this and this and that instead of other values. Instead of being more like this, it's more like that. So it sounds in a way very simplistic. Suddenly, all of a sudden, like we're given the keys to the castle. Now, what are we doing with it?
Right. No, I think one of the things that Dr. Laitman said, which again I find very fascinating, is to reconceptualize Judaism not as a religion of the Jewish people, but as an idea that germinated at one point in this. We can call him a historical figure or a mythological figure, Abraham. It really doesn't matter whether it's history or myth at this point, right? That there was an idea that somehow came into existence and that was promulgated by groups of people that then ended up becoming part of the Israelite nation and then also filtered into Christianity as an offshoot of that and Islam as an offshoot.
Islam, yeah.
Right. So that in a sense, the whole idea is spread around most of the Western world. And that in fact, it's really about trying to reconceptualize the idea as it comes out of all three of those traditions, right? To to come to that place, to return to the Abrahamic, to use Dr. Laitman's terminology, to return to the Abrahamic. I mean, that is a very powerful idea.
אני מאוד מקווה שעל זה אתה תכתוב ספר
really
הבא
hope
שלך.
that this will be your next book, and a few good articles that will go to the media and to. I wish you all the best in that, and in general, if you want to talk more, I'll be very happy.
It's with a pleasure and an honor to meet you. Seriously, I mean that seriously.
Thank you, everyone. I want to end with a quote that I found by Baal Sulam Ashlag. He says in his article, "The Arvut, Mutual Guarantee," he says Rabbi Elazar, son of Rashbi, clarifies the concept of Arvut even further. There's not enough for him that all of Israel be responsible for one another, but the whole world is included in that Arvut.
Yes. No, this is why I just want to say one thing. This is why I think that, interestingly, that I mentioned this before, but the Baal Sulam's sympathy for communism, people don't take that seriously enough. He really saw that as a civilizational vision of a manifestation of his vision of Kabbalah. And I think it's actually quite important.
We need to talk about it, because I know there's a lot about it. I mean, they made a lot of mistakes, and we can learn from that. But that's for another talk. Maybe we can have that other talk about. But thank you, really, Dr. Laitman, Shaul. Thank you so much for taking the time. This is such an important conversation. I hope
I wish you all the best, and be well, and let's connect between all of us.
Yes, and keep writing and keep teaching, because the message is very important.
And everyone, like, subscribe, share the channel, and we want to hear more comments and have more of these honest conversations. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.